The West was a crucible, an unforgiving land that stripped a person down until only their true self remained. For Mara Quinn, it had already taken everything that mattered, her family, her home, and any belief she once had in fairness or law. Now she rode alone through the iron-red canyons of the Arizona Territory, carrying nothing but a stubborn horse and her father's weather-worn medical journal. She was looking for ground she could claim as her own, a place where the past might finally stay buried. But the desert was not a giver. It only demanded payment. And on a day when the sun struck like a hammer of iron, it came to collect the last thing she still owned, her mercy. What she encountered there would place her against a ruthless land baron, the U.S. cavalry, and even the people she would risk everything to protect. Heat pressed down inside the canyon like a living weight, warping the distant rock spires and draining life from the cracked earth. Mara Quinn, her face shaded beneath the battered hat that once belonged to her father, guided her buckskin mare, Ashwind, along what barely passed for a trail. 3 months had passed since the fire. 3 months since she had laid her parents to rest on the scorched land that Barrett Crow now claimed as his own. At 22, Mara carried a toughness born from loss, her once soft features sharpened by grief that had settled deep in her bones. Her father, Dr. Henry Quinn, had been a healer in a land that respected guns more than knowledge. He taught her stitches and poultices, the names of herbs that cooled fever, and the fragile truths of the human body. That knowledge was his legacy, the one thing Crow's riders had failed to burn. Ashwin stumbled, snorting uneasily. Mara eased the reins and scanned the ground. What caught her eye was not stone. It was a dark stain bleeding into the sand, thick with black flies. Her hand slid instinctively to the Colt Peacemaker at her hip, its weight a hard reminder of the world she now lived in. Scattered gravel and dragged marks led away from the stain toward a cluster of sun-bleached boulders. Then she heard it, a thin, broken groan, cutting through the silence. It was not the wind. She dismounted and drew the Colt. Her pulse slammed in her ears as she moved forward, careful and quiet boots barely whispering against the sand. Behind the largest boulder, a body lay collapsed in the narrow band of shade. He was Apache. Long black hair tangled with blood and dust. Buckskin leggings torn and soaked dark on one side. Up close, the damage was unmistakable, a brutal gunshot high in the thigh flesh, swollen and angry. A second shallower cut wept slowly from his ribs. He was young, no older than her. Pain twisted his face. His lips were pale and cracked from thirst. Every instinct told her to turn and run. The Apache were at war. Rumors in Redemption Gulch claimed Torak's son had been leading strikes against settlers pushing into sacred ground. Helping this man meant death. If his people found her and misunderstood, she would die. If the cavalry caught her, she would hang. And men like Barrett Crow would not hesitate to finish the job. A knife glinted in the stranger's clenched hand, proof he had fought hard. He was a warrior, an enemy who would kill her without hesitation, if he had the strength. Then her father's voice surfaced in her mind, calm and steady from another life. You don't treat the uniform, Mara. You don't treat the skin. You treat the wound. The man's chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths. He was dying. Damn you, Papa, she whispered, her throat tight. Walking away meant survival. Staying meant suicide. But as she stared at his silent agony, she no longer saw a warrior or an outlaw. She saw a young man far from home, bleeding beneath a pitiless sky. She saw fear she recognized. The same desperate grip on life. She holstered the Colt and knelt beside him. Easy now, she murmured the words, sounding small in the vast canyon. Dark eyes flickered open, black as night, burning with fever and suspicion. No recognition, only pain. Mara uncorked her canteen, soaked her handkerchief, and gently touched it to his lips. He flinched, but was too weak to pull away. The moment felt irreversible. The wound in his leg was bad. The bullet was still lodged inside infection already taking hold. He would not survive another night out here. The canyon was an oven by day, a freezing trap by night, filled with predators on 4 legs and 2. Her choice did not come in a flash of heroism. It came as quiet surrender to the woman her father had raised. "All right," she breathed. "Let's cheat death." Getting him onto the horse nearly broke her. He was heavier than he looked, lean, dense muscle. He groaned with every movement as she dragged and lifted, sweat stinging her eyes. Using a low rock and sheer stubborn will, she hauled him across the saddle, slumping him forward against Ashwin's neck. He drifted in and out of consciousness, head lolling. She tied his wrists loosely to the saddle horn, not to restrain him, but to keep him from falling. One last look at the ground told her the truth. 3 sets of shod tracks, not Apache ponies. This had not been a fight. It had been an execution. He had somehow survived. Mara took Ashwin's reins and led them away from the trail, deeper into the maze of stone, already knowing that once she started walking, there would be no turning back. With Ronak secured, Mara took Ashwin's reins and started on foot, steering them away from the trail and deeper into the twisting canyons. She knew of a place, an abandoned line shack her father once used on long medical rides, hidden inside a box canyon, a day's walk from there. It was their only hope. As she walked, the full weight of her choice pressed down on her. She was now an outlaw by association, sheltering an enemy of the state and an enemy of her own kind. Every shadow felt watchful. Every breath of wind sounded like riders closing in. She was carrying a wounded Apache across hostile land, a secret that would damn her if discovered. What she could not yet know was who Ronak truly was, or that this single act of mercy had already sparked something that would shake the entire territory. The line shack barely deserved the name. Its sun-bleached timbers leaned into the canyon wall, hidden behind stubborn junipers and reachable only through a narrow, rock-choked passage. It was here in this forgotten pocket of the world that Mara Quinn began the real work. Inside, the single room smelled of dust and neglect. A rough cot with a straw mattress, a warped table, and a small stone hearth made up the furnishings. After settling Ronak onto the cot, his fevered breathing a constant rasp in the silence, Mara reinforced the space. She braced the door with a heavy log and draped a torn horse blanket over the lone window, plunging the shack into a dim, protective gloom. For the next 2 days, the world narrowed to these 4 walls and the man burning within them. Mara was no longer a displaced homesteader's daughter. She became a nurse, a sentry, a negotiator with death itself. She used the last of her canteen water to clean his wounds, guided by the lessons Henry Quinn had drilled into her hands. The gash along Ronak's ribs was manageable. The bullet lodged in his thigh was not. "This is going to hurt," she said quietly, though he could not hear her. She laid out her father's compact surgical kit on a boiled cloth, a slim knife, a probe and forceps, passing each through a candle flame, as her hands trembled despite her resolve. She had done this once before years ago with her father, overseeing every move. Now there was no one but her. She tipped a generous swallow of whiskey down Ronak's throat, the only mercy she could offer. He choked, eyes snapping open in panic and pain before fever dragged him back under. Mara inhaled, once steadying herself, then made the cut. Ronak bucked violently, a strangled cry tearing from his throat. Mara threw her weight across his chest, pinning him down, her face inches from his. "I'm sorry," she rasped, tears blurring her vision. "Stay still. Just stay still." The probe struck metal near the bone. Her fingers, slick with blood, guided the forceps in. Time stretched thin. The only sounds were Ronak's broken breathing and the harsh scrape of steel against bone. With a sharp twist and a final pull, the bullet came free. It clattered into a tin bowl. Ronak went limp, slipping into unconsciousness at last. Shaking and soaked in sweat, Mara packed the wound with yarrow to stop the bleeding and willow bark to fight the fever, just as her father had taught her. She bound it tight with strips torn from her own spare petticoat. For 2 more days, Ronak hovered between worlds. Fever racked him, and he thrashed in delirium, shouting words she could not understand, harsh sounds filled with fury and plea alike. When clarity surfaced, his dark eyes fixed on her not with gratitude, but with sharp, feral mistrust. To him, she was the enemy, a white woman whose presence was an intrusion. He refused the water she offered until thirst broke his pride. He turned away from the broth she managed to make from a trapped rabbit. On the third morning the fever broke. Mara woke to find Ronak watching her, his eyes clear for the first time. The suspicion remained, but now it was edged with confusion. He pushed himself onto his elbows, hissing as pain flared through his leg. "Easy," Mara said softly, staying where she was. "You'll tear the stitches." Ronak looked down at the bandaged thigh, then at his ribs. He touched the clean wrapping slowly, as if trying to understand how they were even possible. His eyes returned to her searching, weighing. Mara lifted the canteen. Water, she offered. He answered with a single restrained nod. She stepped closer and placed it in his hands, letting him drink on his own terms. He swallowed deeply, never breaking eye contact. Then, halting and rough, he spoke one word in English. Why? The question settled heavily between them. Why had she done it? Mara wasn't certain she could explain it even to herself. "My father was a healer," she said at last. "At set. He taught me to treat the wound, not the man." That seemed enough for now. Either he accepted it or stored it away for later judgment. A fragile, unspoken ceasefire settled over the shack. They were still captor and captive nurse and Apache settler and enemy. But in that moment, they were also two people sharing the same narrow edge of survival. The problem was time. Their supplies were running out. The water skin was nearly empty. The rabbit broth wouldn't last. His leg needed clean bandages and a stronger salve than she could make from canyon herbs. There was only one place left to go. "I have to ride into Redemption Gulch," Mara told him the next morning. "I'll be back by tomorrow night." His eyes tightened. He didn't trust her. He likely believed she would return with soldiers or a rope. He said nothing, only watched as she gathered her things, his silence pressing down on her. "I'm going to tie your hands," she said firmly, though without cruelty. "I have to, but I will come back." He did not resist as she secured his wrists to the cot frame, leaving enough slack to spare him pain. At the doorway, Mara paused and looked back. His face was carved into stone, but his eyes betrayed him fear, answering her own. She was leaving him defenseless and walking straight into a town that would gladly hang her if the truth came out. Redemption Gulch was a raw infection on the land. One dusty street, a saloon, a general store, a blacksmith, and a sheriff's office all simmered beneath the brutal sun. The air reeked of cheap whiskey manure and suspicion. As Mara Quinn rode in, conversations died. Eyes followed her. A woman alone was an oddity. A capable woman alone was a provocation. She went straight to the sheriff's office. She needed to read the town before it read her. Sheriff Cole Rourke looked like a man worn thin by dust and disappointment. Barrel-chested, leather-faced eyes dulled by too many bad outcomes. He didn't rise when she entered. "Didn't expect to see you back so soon." "Miss Quinn," he muttered. "Figured you'd be halfway to California by now." "Just picking up supplies," Sheriff Mara said evenly. "Thought I'd try my luck north of the canyon." "Bad country," Rourke warned, leaning back as his chair complained. "Apache trouble. Prospectors went missing last week. We found what was left of them yesterday." His gaze sharpened, and Barrett Crow just posted a bounty. $50 silver. Any hostile Apache, dead or alive. One of his survey crews got hit. The words iced her blood. $50 would turn desperation into bloodlust. "I'll be careful," Mara said, keeping her voice steady. Her next stop was the general store. Ezra Holt, older now and stooped with time, greeted her with a familiar sadness. He had known her father. "Mara Quinn," he said gently. "Good to see you, but you shouldn't be out here alone." "I'm managing." she replied, forcing a smile. She gathered flour, bacon, coffee, and most important, carbolic acid and clean linen. As Ezra wrapped the bundle, the bell above the door rang and a shadow spilled across the floor. Barrett Crow stepped inside, flanked by 2 of his crow riders. He was refined in a predatory way, silver at the temples, eyes cold as winter glass. He dressed like an Eastern gentleman, but everything about him spoke of dominance and hunger. The man who stole her land, the man who burned her past. "Well now," Crow said smoothly, "Miss Quinn, I hear you're still lingering. Dangerous choice for a woman on her own." "I'm tougher than I look, Mr. Crow," Mara answered, jaw tight. His gaze drifted to her purchases, pausing on the bandages and acid. Interest flickered. "Someone sick at your camp?" he asked casually. "Just being prepared," Mara said, heart hammering. "This country cuts deep." Crow smiled, but his eyes never did. Indeed, Barrett Crow said, his smile stopping short of his eyes. "My men are riding that country right now, hunting down the Apache vermin who hit my survey crew. They wounded one, but he slipped away." A faint chuckle followed. "A clever bastard. If you happen to see anything at all, there's a generous reward." The 2 crow riders behind him stared openly, filthy and thick-necked. One stepped forward, a man with a split scar along his lip and a missing finger on his left hand. He spat tobacco juice near Mara's boots. She knew him. He was one of the men she had seen riding away from her homestead the day it burned. Mara paid Ezra Holt, her fingers trembling as she took the wrapped supplies. "I'll keep my eyes open," she said, barely recognizing her own voice. She left the store with Crow's gaze burning into her back. The lie she carried felt suffocating. She had walked into the predator's den to buy medicine for the hunted, and the predator had just told her the chase was on. The $50 bounty had turned the territory into a killing field, and she was hiding what Crow wanted most. Returning to the line shack felt like stepping back into a fortress already under attack. The setting sun bled across the canyon walls as Mara slipped through the hidden passage, nerves screaming. Every stone looked like a crouched man. Every gust of wind sounded like riders closing in. Crow's words echoed relentlessly. "My men are riding that country right now." She found Ronak, exactly where she had left him, tethered to the cot. His eyes, sharp despite the pain, went straight to the parcel in her hands. He watched without a word as she unpacked the supplies. His gaze lingered on the clean bandages and the small brown bottle of carbolic acid. He understood. "The town is not safe," he said, his voice stronger now, each English word deliberate. "No." Mara nodded as she prepared a fresh dressing. "It isn't." She turned toward him. "They're hunting you. A man named Barrett Crow. He's placed a bounty on your head." At the sound of the name, fire lit Ronak's eyes, cold, controlled rage that cut through the pain. "Barrett Crow," he repeated softly, venom in the words. "He is the one." The truth locked into place for Mara. "So the ambush wasn't random," she said slowly. "They were targeting you." Ronak looked away, jaw tightening. For a long moment, he said nothing. Trust did not come easily to him. Finally, he met her eyes, studying her as if weighing her very soul. "My people know of a place," he said. "We call it Moon Sickness Rock." "Moon Sickness Rock?" Mara asked. "What you call silver," he explained. "A great vein hidden in the heart of the Dragoon Mountains. Sacred to the Chirikawa clan. Crow had hunted it for years. He tortured my people for its location. He caught me alone away from my warriors." Ronak touched the bandaged wound on his leg. "He did not want me dead, not yet. He wanted the secret." Now the bounty made sense. Crow didn't want Ronak killed. He wanted him found. $50 were meant to turn every settler into a pair of watching eyes. As Mara cleaned the wound with the sharp-smelling carbolic acid, a deeper understanding settled between them. The silence no longer felt empty. It carried shared purpose. She was no longer just tending a wounded Apache. She was guarding something that could get them both killed. Ronak was no longer just a patient. He was the keeper of a sacred truth, hunted by a man she despised with every part of herself. "My name is Mara Quinn," she said quietly, breaking the silence. Ronak met her gaze. Ronak. The exchange was simple, but it changed everything. They were no longer strangers defined by rumor and blood. They were two people bound by the same enemy and the same danger. Over the following week, a fragile routine formed. Mara hunted and foraged, never straying far from the shack. Ronak's strength returned slowly. First he sat up. Then he stood leaning on a staff Mara carved from juniper. He taught her words in his tongue for water, for horse, for danger. In return, she read aloud from the only book she carried, a worn volume of Shakespeare's tragedies that once belonged to Abigail Quinn. Ronak listened closely, drawn to stories of kings, betrayal, honor, and revenge, truths that crossed every boundary. One afternoon, as Mara mended her coat near the fire, something caught the light at Ronak's waist. A knife, the same blade he had clutched when she found him. Its hilt was unlike anything she had seen, set with a single polished piece of turquoise, carved into the shape of a hawk in flight. It was a finely made blade, unmistakable in its craft. Mara's blood chilled her breath, catching hard in her chest. She had seen a knife just like it before. Her mind was pulled back 2 years to a hot afternoon when Henry Quinn had been summoned to the Double C Ranch to treat a cattle baron thrown from his horse. Mara had gone with him. The rancher, loud and full of himself, had paraded a trophy taken from a skirmish with an Apache raiding party. A knife. Its hilt bore a turquoise hawk. "I took it off the body of a chief's son," the man had bragged. His father, the war chief, Torak, came himself under a flag of truce, walked into my camp alone, offered 10 prime horses to buy this trinket back. The baron had laughed, said it was the mark of his bloodline. I told him to go straight to hell. Mara's gaze moved slowly from the knife to Ronak's face, truly seeing him for the first time. The sharp cheekbones, the proud cut of his jaw, the quiet authority that injury and hardship had failed to strip away. He was not merely Apache. He was not simply a warrior. Torak. She whispered the name, heavy and dangerous on her tongue. "Your father is Torak." Ronak's composure shattered. Shock crossed his face as his hand flew to the knife, covering the turquoise hawk protectively. "How do you know that name?" he demanded. "The war chief of the Chirikawa clan." Her thoughts reeled as the truth crashed into place. "The stories say he's the most feared and respected leader since Cochise," she said. "You..." She swallowed. "You are his son, the man she had carried across the canyon, the fugitive hidden in a dirt-walled shack. He was Apache royalty, the heir to the most powerful war chief in the territory. Everything changed. If Ronak were captured or killed, it would not be a simple victory for Barrett Crow or the cavalry. It would be a devastating blow to his people, one that could ignite a war unlike anything the territory had known. The secret Mara now carried became crushing. Their fragile calm shattered 2 days later. She was outside resetting snares when she heard the distant, unmistakable sound of shod horses picking through stone, more than one. Her heart leapt as she burst through the door. Ronak was already standing, staff clenched in one hand, knife in the other. Pain no longer mattered. Instinct ruled. The window, he said urgently. "Take the horse. Go. I'm not leaving you." Mara snapped, grabbing her coat and rifle. "They follow me," he argued. "If they find you, you die. You are a woman alone. They will not suspect. Go now." The voices were closer now. Rough laughter echoed off the canyon walls. Mara peered through a crack in the door. 4 riders, and leading them was the man from the general store, the one with the scarred lip and missing finger. Rusk Dolan, one of Crow's riders, the same man who had helped burn her home. Cold, blinding rage surged through her. This was no longer just about saving Roanoke. It was about Henry Quinn, Abigail Quinn, everything stolen from her. "There's a fissure at the back of the canyon," she whispered. "Narrow, but it leads to the rim. We can climb." My leg, Roanoke said the word, heavy with truth. "I'll help you," Mara vowed, locking eyes with him. "We go together." A silent agreement passed. Roanoke nodded. They moved to the rear of the shack. Mara kicked free, a plank weakened by rot opening a narrow escape. They slipped out just as the riders reached the canyon mouth. The Crow riders spotted Ashwind tethered near the junipers and shouted triumphantly. "She's in that shack," Rusk Dolan yelled. Crow was right. She bought medicine. Find the Apache, trash. As the men dismounted and rushed forward, Mara and Roanoke vanished into the canyon's shadows, racing for the dark slash in the rock. The hunt had reached their door. Their refuge was gone. Their only chance was straight up. The fissure was a raw wound in the stone, a vertical scar twisting toward the canyon rim. It would challenge a healthy climber. For a man with a freshly healed bullet wound, it was brutal. "I can't," Roanoke grunted, pressed against the sandstone. His fingers went white on the rock as his injured leg shook, refusing him. Below, the shouts of the Crow riders grew louder as they discovered that empty shack and the escape route. Time was gone. "Yes, you can," Mara Quinn insisted, her voice sharp with force, fear tasting like iron on her tongue. She was braced above him, fingers scraped raw muscles trembling with strain. "Give me your hand." She dug her boot into a narrow ledge, anchored herself, and reached down. Roanoke looked up, sweat streaking his face, pain etched into every line. In his eyes, pride battled the betrayal of his own body. He hesitated. "Roanoke, now," she commanded. He slapped his hand into hers. Her grip locked tight. Mara pulled with everything she had back, and shoulders screaming as she dragged him upward. Adrenaline surged, and she hauled him high enough for his good leg to find a firmer hold. Again, she gasped. Inch by brutal inch, they climbed two bodies, fighting gravity, time, and exhaustion together. Below them, angry voices rose. Boots scraped stone. Then a gunshot cracked. The bullet shrieked off the rock inches from Mara's head, spraying shards across the fissure. "They're shooting!" she shouted, terror fueling her strength. They moved faster now, panic burning hotter than pain. Roanoke found a rhythm born of necessity, hauling himself upward with powerful arms while favoring his injured leg. Mara became his eyes testing holds, guiding each move. They were no longer two people. They were one. At last, lungs burning, they dragged themselves over the canyon rim and collapsed onto the sun-baked mesa. They were exposed but free of the fissure. Below them, Rusk Dolan and the Crow riders were still struggling up the rock. "We have to move," Mara rasped, forcing herself upright. "They'll be up here in minutes." The mesa stretched wide and merciless bare rock, thorn scrub, nowhere to hide. To the north lay the distant haze of the Dragoon Mountains, Roanoke's home. Between them sprawled a brutal wasteland, prospectors called Devil's Anvil. A maze of broken ridges, narrow canyons, and dead ends. Waterless. Confusing. Deadly. "This way," Roanoke said, nodding toward jagged stone formations. His mind had shifted, no longer fleeing, but thinking like a warrior again. "We use the land." The chase became a ruthless game. They had no horses, no water. Only a handful of rounds in Mara's revolver. Their pursuers had all of that. But Mara and Roanoke had knowledge. She remembered fragments from Henry Quinn's old maps. Roanoke read the land instinctively, terrain speaking to him in a language learned from birth. They laid false trails doubled back where footprints vanished into stone. They squeezed through gaps too narrow for horses, forcing the riders to dismount and lose ground. The sun hammered them without mercy, draining strength, blistering skin. Thirst clawed at their throats. By late afternoon, they ran out of land. The dry wash they followed ended suddenly at a sheer drop 100 feet straight down. A narrow ledge clung to the cliff face. They were trapped. From the opposite side, figures appeared: Rusk Dolan and 3 crow riders, silhouetted against the blazing western sky. Nowhere left to run, little Lady Rusk called, dismounting with a rifle in hand. His grin was pure rot. "Mr. Crow wants the Apache alive. Says he's got questions." His eyes slid to Mara. "As for you," he said, "we could enjoy ourselves." The other men laughed. The threat was unmistakable. Mara lifted her coat revolver steady in her hand. "Stay back," she warned, voice low and lethal. Ronak stood beside her with only his knife and staff. He swayed from pain and exhaustion, but his eyes burned it like a cornered wolf. "That toy won't stop 4 of us." Rusk sneered, stepping closer. "Drop it." Mara's mind raced. A gunfight meant death. Surrender was worse. Her gaze darted along the cliff face, searching, desperate. Then she saw it. Above the men, a fragile overhang of shale and loose stone clung to the canyon wall, cracked and unstable from centuries of wind and rain. An idea sparked, wild, reckless, desperate. "Ronak," she whispered without looking away. "The rock above them. Do you see it?" His gaze followed hers. Understanding flickered. A dangerous gamble. "You have 1 bullet?" he asked quietly. "No," she answered, heart sinking. "I left it at the shack." Ronak's jaw set. "Then the revolver will have to do." The pistol was unreliable at this distance, an almost hopeless shot. Rusk Dolan was losing patience. "I ain't warning you again. It's too far." Mara Quinn breathed, hope thinning to a fragile thread. Beside her, Ronak spoke calmly, his voice steady despite the chaos. "You are strong, Mara Quinn. You see like the hawk. Let your spirit guide the shot." His faith in her, complete, unquestioning, cut through the fear. It left behind a sharp, cold focus. She drew a slow breath, remembering Henry Quinn's voice the first time he had placed a rifle in her hands. "Exhale. Squeeze. Don't pull." Mara raised the revolver with both hands, bracing her arms. The front sight trembled over the distant rock shelf. "What in hell is she doing?" One of the crow riders scoffed. Rusk lifted his rifle. "She's lost her damn mind. Shoot her." Mara fired. The crack of the shot ripped through the canyon. For a terrible heartbeat, nothing happened. The bullet was small. The rock looked solid. Rusk grinned, finger tightening on the trigger. Then the mountain answered. A low rumble rolled through the stone. One large rock tore free from the overhang, then another. Thin fractures spidered across the cliff face. With a thunderous roar, the entire section collapsed. Tons of earth and stone cascaded downward in a violent torrent. The men looked up, faces locked in disbelief and terror. They never ran. The rock slide swallowed them whole, dust, noise, and fury merging into a single consuming force. Screams were cut short, erased by the mountain's voice. When the dust finally settled, the land was unrecognizable. The path below lay buried beneath a massive wall of rubble. Of Rusk Dolan and his men, there was no trace, only silence. Mara stood frozen, the revolver still extended, smoke curling from the barrel. Her arms shook uncontrollably. She had not pulled the trigger on them, but she had unleashed their end. Ronak placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "You saved us," he said, awe filling his voice. Mara looked at him, eyes wide, breath unsteady. She had called down the mountain itself and survived. They stood together at the edge of the world as the sun sank low, casting long shadows across the land. The way forward toward the Dragoon Mountains lay open. The way back was buried forever. They had won this fight, but Mara knew with chilling certainty that when Barrett Crow learned what had happened, the real war would begin. The final stretch of their journey felt like a march through ghosts. What had happened at Devil's Anvil weighed heavily on them, a shared trauma needing no words. Their silence was no longer awkward, but bonded the quiet of people who had survived the same battle. Ronak grew stronger with each passing day. His limp faded. He guided them through the foothills of the Dragoon Mountains with instinctive confidence, moving as if the land itself welcomed him home. They traveled by night, hiding during the brutal daylight hours. Ronak taught Mara how to find water where none seemed possible, how to read the stars, how to move without leaving a trace. She no longer saw the land as something to conquer, but as something alive, deserving respect. On the third night, they saw the fires. High in a protected valley shielded by towering granite cliffs lay the Chirikawa stronghold, the rancheria. It was larger than any settlement Mara had ever seen alive, with cook fires and movement. Relief washed over her, followed immediately by fear. She had returned the war chief's son, but she was still an outsider, a white settler, an enemy. As they approached, two sentinels stepped from the shadows, rifles raised. Their eyes locked on Mara with open hostility. They barked a sharp command at Ronak. He answered in their language, his voice carrying authority he had not used in weeks. He straightened, no longer a wounded fugitive, but a son of power returning home. He gestured toward Mara, speaking at length. The sentinels' expressions did not soften. Their suspicion remained heavy and unyielding. One motioned with his rifle for them to proceed. They walked into the heart of the village. Word of Ronak's return spread instantly. People poured from their homes, faces filled with shock, joy, disbelief. A woman broke free from the crowd, her face lined with fear and relief, and wrapped Ronak in her arms, sobbing his name, Saya, his mother. But when eyes turned to Mara, joy curdled. Murmurs followed her like shadows. Stares cut deep and sharp. They saw her revolver, her pale skin, her settler's clothes, and they saw only an enemy. They were guided to the largest wickiup, where a wide central fire roared and breathed sparks into the night. A single figure stepped forward and the village went still. He was tall and broad across the shoulders, a presence that settled the air. His face carried both authority and grief, carved deep by years of leadership. Long hair, streaked with gray, was tied back with a plain leather thong. His eyes, dark, sharp, and unyielding, like his son's, held the memory of every loss and victory his people had endured. This was Torak. He did not move to embrace his son. He studied Ronak in silence, taking in the torn clothes, the hardened lines of his body, the wounds still knitting themselves together. Then his gaze shifted to Mara Quinn. The weight of it pinned her where she stood. She had never been examined so completely, as if every fear she had buried and every truth she had lived by were laid bare in a single breath. Ronak stepped forward. His voice cut through the hush, steady and fierce. He told them of the ambush by Barrett Crow's riders of blood, in the dust of waking in an unfamiliar shelter, to find a white woman binding his wounds. He spoke of her courage, how she had crossed into enemy territory for medicine, how she had climbed and run with death at her heels, how she had stood her ground on Ashwind, facing 4 armed men and calling the mountain itself to shield them. When he finished, Ronak turned to Mara. Before his people, he spoke English clearly, without hesitation. She did this not for money or fear. She did it because her heart is strong and her spirit is true. She honored me. She saved my life. Silence followed. Torak's eyes never left Mara as he stepped closer, his presence heavy as stone. He passed his son and stopped directly in front of her, so close she could see the lines etched around his eyes. He said nothing. Mara did not look away. Her pulse thundered, but she stood firm and let him see her as she was. She had followed her father's principles and her own conscience. Whatever judgment came, she would meet it unbroken. At last Torak reached out. He did not draw a blade. He took her hand gently, the hand that had cut away, rot and clot, the hand that had held a coat against bleeding flesh and turned it palm up. He examined the calluses, the dirt beneath her nails, the marks of hardship earned honestly. Then he looked into her face and gave one slow nod. He turned to the Chirikawa clan and spoke in their tongue, his voice deep and commanding. The tension in the crowd eased. Faces softened. Understanding spread. They saw her differently now, not as an enemy, but as the woman from their future chief's story. Some would later call her the Hawk Woman of the Canyon. That night, Mara was given a place of honor by the fire. Food and water were brought. Her story passed from mouth to mouth. She watched as Torak finally drew Ronak into a private embrace, brief, powerful, and rare. For 2 days, she remained a guest, both strange and respected, glimpsing a world she had never known. She saw the strength of their bonds, the care they held for the land that Barrett Crow sought only to strip bare. She understood then she had saved more than a man. She had protected a piece of this world. On the 3rd morning, she prepared to leave. Torak met her beside Ashwind, who had been found and tended by the sentinels. Ronak stood at his father's side. "You are welcome here, Mara Quinn." Torak said, his English slow but firm. "You will always have safe passage through our lands." At his signal, a warrior led forward. A powerful bay stallion, its tack decorated with intricate beadwork. "A gift," Torak said. "A life for a life." Mara shook her head, overwhelmed. "I can't accept this." "You must," Ronak said quietly. "To refuse would mean my life is worth less than that horse." "It isn't." She looked at him, the man she had found bleeding in the dirt, now standing proud, shaped for leadership. Something unbreakable had formed between them. "Thank you," she whispered, taking the reins. She rode out of the rancheria the same way she had entered, but the eyes upon her now held respect instead of suspicion. Ronak walked with her to the edge of the valley. "Where will you go?" "I have a homestead," she said, her voice steady with new purpose. "It was stolen from me. It's time I took it back." Ronak smiled, a rare and genuine expression. "Barrett Crow has made a powerful enemy, not only of the Chirikawa clan, but of you. He has no idea what's coming." They exchanged a final look, heavy with things unspoken. With a nod, Mara turned Ashwind east and rode on. She left not as a victim, nor as a wanderer, but as a woman forged by fire, one who had carried a chief's son across a canyon and discovered her own strength in the doing. The West remained a crucible, but it had not consumed her. It had shaped her into something harder, something enduring. The story of Mara Quinn and Ronak does not end at the canyon's edge. It moves through the marrow of the Wild West, a reminder that courage is not the fight you choose, but the life you choose to save. And beneath the scars of war and the lines drawn in dust, shared humanity can still build a bridge, even in the harshest land. All stories are created for entertainment purposes and may include fictional elements or dramatized interpretations inspired by historical settings. We use AI tools, voiceover visuals, scripts as creative assistants. However, all content is reviewed, refined, and edited by humans to ensure emotional authenticity and storytelling quality. We fully comply with YouTube's policies regarding AI-generated content and do not use any deepfake techniques or misleading recreations of real individuals. All visuals and supporting materials are properly licensed. Sharing, re-uploading, modifying, or distributing any part of this content in any form requires written permission. We appreciate your support and respect for original creative work.